2026.
We're so glad to see you. This is January, yes,
20th.
20th, 2026, the second of our two series. And last week we had more of the biblical and more historical. And today we're going to go more into the spiritual and Kabbalistic. We're very excited. So I turn it over to Reb Simcha Raphael to take us to the other realm.
Okay, folks, it's always nice to be here and to see in Rabbi Alicia's background the wonderful red rocks of Sedona. What does Judaism have to say about life after death? But even more today, I want to talk about how does that change the way we deal with death, dying, and mourning. Particularly, one of the questions I'm going to answer is in what way are our Jewish death rituals, particular Shiva Kaddish Yisker Yortzeit, burial Shiva Kaddish Yisker Yortzeit, and afterlife teachings, how are they connected, and how does learning about afterlife change the way we think about some of these rituals? Okay, so two-part class. If you missed the first class, it's been posted somewhere online, Mary. I gather. I haven't gotten that message. Today we're going to do afterlife and Kabbalistic tradition, the post-mortem journey of the soul. And in a minute we're going to do a bracha for Torah study, but I want to introduce it in a little different way than I did last time. There's a teaching that you may be familiar with that goes like this. Al shlosha dvarim ha'olam omed. The world stands on three things. Al HaTorah, al Avodah, al Gilut Chasadim. On Torah, our study of Jewish texts. Avodah being work, spiritual practices. And Gemilut Chasadim, it's usually translated as deeds of loving kindness, but it also can be committees. Right? So we know that the thrust of Jewish life is to engage in learning of Torah, in our prayer practices, and in doing what we can to make the world a better place. But what is not known is that it could also be understood, that this teaching could also be understood to speak of the relationship between the world of the dead and the world of the living. And I'll do it in reverse order. Gemilut Chasadim. One of the things we do at the time of a yortzeit, at the anniversary of a death, is we give money to tzedakah. We make a charitable donation. And if you were here and able to answer me, you can put in chat, why do we give a charitable donation? If anybody can put a quick answer. To get a tax receipt, because it's good for the bereaved. Hi, yeah, please dialogue with me. Let's go.
It occurs to me that many people would want to say, well, the person who has passed away cannot do mitzvot, but we can, and they get the merit in the world to come.
That's sort of been a very good contemporary interpretation. But traditionally, we give tzedakah at the time of a yortzeit because it's good for the post-mortem state of the soul.
Right.
Our giving tzedakah on behalf of somebody else helps their soul evolve or get, as you'll say, unhooked from some of the difficult places of the afterlife journey.
Right, so you're going to talk about a journey of the soul after death in how it purifies or somehow gets to a different state, and our mitzvot, you're saying, helps them in that journey, yes?
Absolutely.
Great.
Okay, and similarly, avodah, prayer, we say a Kaddish, and the belief is, of course, it's a good bereavement ritual, but traditionally the understanding is Kaddish helps redeem the souls from the torments of Gehenna, which I'm going to talk about, because that's a very complex. Even that notion is kind of complex for our modern sensibilities. So I'm going to have to parse that one out. And Torah, we study Torah because it's good for this. Because we study Torah and we can dedicate the merit of our study for the soul of someone else. So like I did last week, think or put into the chat the name of anybody you want to dedicate our merit to. Okay, let's take on three. We'll say the bracha for Torah study together. 1, 2, 3. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Holy One
Amen.
of blessing, majesty of all time and space, thank you for this opportunity to soak in these holy words of Torah. Amen. Okay, so here's my question. Do Jews believe in heaven and hell? And do Jews believe in life after death? So here's the answer to this question. Holly said yes. Well, you were here last time, so right? Few people. The truth is, some do and some don't. If you ask the question, do Jews believe in life after death? Some Jews do and some Jews don't. And secular beliefs is very much a part of contemporary Jewish culture. Right? So it became a viable form of identity to be a Jew as a political organizer. The Jews were in the labor unions as a literary creator. There were many Jewish novelists and poets, and you could be legitimately Jewish without necessarily having to be religiously Jewish. But in pre-modern Judaism, there was never any question of a belief in life after death. In case you weren't here last week, I'm sort of repeating a few things as we prepare to go into Kabbalah. As I mentioned, Fiddler on the Roof is an afterlife tale. Fiddler on the Roof by Shalom Aleicham's Tevye historians becomes a story that's very much about connection between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Judaism's teachings on life after death were lost to the historical flow of modernity. And again, I said that between the Reform movement and scientific materialism, and then later the Holocaust, basically our cultural access to teachings on life after death in Judaism were progressively weeded out over decades. And as I shared last week, when I was 21 and my closest friend was killed in a car accident, and it's actually going to be the anniversary of that tomorrow, there was nowhere to turn to. So I had to write the book that I would have wanted to read when I was a 21-year-old kid and my friend was killed in a car accident. But to ask the question in another way, does Judaism believe in the afterlife, right? Not, do Jews believe in the afterlife? Some do, some don't. But does Judaism believe in the afterlife? What we have to do for that is we have to time travel to the 12th century. Rabbi Alicia, I don't know if you told people we're going to time travel. They have to make sure they pack their their medications that they need. You got to be a little bit psychic ready. In a sense, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the world of the Kabbalists and we're going to interview them, and we're going to ask them what they had to say about life after death. And you already have the transcript of the interview in the text that I gave you. We have to time travel to the 12th century, to the world of Kabbalah. From the 12th century onward, that becomes sort of the halcyon era, the ideal era of Kabbalah, from the 12th to the 16th century. Anybody been to Tzfat? Safed was like one of the great Kabbalistic communities. And there's a whole history to Tzfat, which I won't go into now. But the Zohar was a mystical commentary on the Torah, sort of a midrash, almost a mystical midrash on the Torah. And you find a lot of teachings on life after death there. And then in Hasidism, which is a pietistic movement of spiritual renewal of the Baal Shem Tov. So Kabbalah is 12th to 16th century. It's much more metaphysical and philosophical. The Kabbalists were were interested in the mystery of the universe. The Kabbalists were interested in the how souls were created and then what happened to souls after death. The Hasidim take philosophical teachings of Kabbalah and they bring it to the masses. Hasidism Hasidism is not just the Jews in Borough Park selling diamonds. In its time, Hasidism was a mass movement in the Pale of the Settlement, in what's really modern Ukraine. And in 1900, the nephew of the Gerer Rebbe, the Gerer dynasty was one of the great dynasties, the nephew of the Gerer Rebbe was in the Polish parliament. When I heard that, it was like, oh my God, that really was a mainstream movement. So I was saying that teachings on the afterlife journey of the soul that appear in Kabbalah were communicated to the folk level through storytelling. So let me, I have to tell you a story, okay? This is a story that was told of Reb Elimelech of Lezhensk. Elimelech of Lezhensk was one of the early and great Hasidic masters. And in his lifetime, he had a friend who was a great Torah scholar. They would learn together, they would study. And his friend coming up to him and says, my time to leave the world is rapidly approaching. Can you do me a favor? And he says, what do you need? He says, can you educate my son in the ways of the Jewish people? Can you take care of my son? So Elimelech says, I will, but on one condition. On one condition? What kind of condition do you make with a guy who's dying? He says, I'll educate your son on the condition that you come back and tell me what it's like on the other side. So they shake, it's a gentleman's agreement, and Reb Elimelech does everything he can to take care of the son. Comes time for the bar mitzvah, there were like 2 bands, and in this culture, if you're going to educate a young bucher, a young man, you're going to make sure you do a shidduch, an arranged marriage, and, according to the text, she had been to the orthodontist, she had a master's degree, it was a classy, it was a classy shidduch. And as the stand-in for the groom's late father and the kind of guiding rabbi for this young man, Reb Elimelech was supposed to do the wedding. And they get to the wedding, and the groom's family is there, and the bride's family is there, and Reb Elimelech was nowhere to be seen. I mean, this was a bit of a problem. The hors d'oeuvres were getting cold, the guests were getting kvetchy, they were looking around, where's the rabbi, what's going to happen, what's going on here. Finally, they wait an hour, they wait 2 hours, they go peek into the keyhole of the Rebbe's study, and the Rebbe's meditating. And as your rabbi will tell you, if, the rabbi's meditating, nobody will disturb him or her under any conditions whatsoever, right? You can, listen, stay on camera. It's good to see it's good to see a live face. If you could do it, I'd like that. So they wait an hour. So eventually Reb Elimelech comes to the ceremony, and he does the ceremony. At the end of the ceremony, they put down the glass, they break the glass, they cry out, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. And then Reb Elimelech gets up to speak to the guests. He says, I suppose you're wondering where I was. So let me tell you a story. So he proceeds to tell a story to the guests of the initial arrangements he had made with the groom's late father. And he said, here, I had fulfilled my part of the bargain, and he hadn't fulfilled his part of the bargain. He hadn't come back to tell me what it's like on the other side. So I'm waiting. And then he goes, Elimelech, is that you? Chaim, what was it like? He said the moment of death was absolutely painless. It was like taking hair out of milk. And I could see all the people standing around and crying and shrieing. And I said, stop, I'm over here. But they couldn't hear me, and they couldn't see me. I wait. And then I see the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, preparing my body. And I said, stop, you're wasting your time. I'm right over here. And again, they couldn't see me. They couldn't hear me. They were also busy figuring out all the minutiae of the Chevra Kadisha. They didn't even realize that I was in the room right there. They'll take me to the cemetery, they'll bury me, and I'll come back and explain it was all a mistake. I follow the procession out to the cemetery. Everybody leaves, and I have this burning passion. I have to get back home. So I'm starting to dig out furiously, and it's starting to thunder and start to lightning. And I think, oh, maybe I should stay here. No, I'm digging a third, faster third. Get me out of here. And it's thundering and it's lightning. And do I go? No, don't go. Stay, do this. Stay, no, don't stay. Do I go? Do I get the car? No, go out. Help! And all of a sudden, I see before my eyes this great being of light. And this being of light says to me, you're no longer in the world of confusion. You've entered the universe of truth. And instantly I could see a panoramic deed of every single mitzvah I've ever done, every single deed I have ever done in my life in a panoramic vision. And now I know I have to stand for judgment. And I wait and I wait. I wait for the judgment from the heavenly tribunal. And the judgment comes down that basically I have been a God-fearing man. Basically I've tried to serve my Creator so I don't enter into Gehenna, purgatory. There's no eternal damnation in Judaism. But I could have more fully served my Creator. I could have more fully lived my destiny. I certainly could have paid my synagogue dues on time. So I don't enter into the heavenly Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. So what's going to happen to me, I ask? So I'm assigned a resting place in between Gehenna and Gan Eden, in between the underworld of torment and the heavenly Garden of Eden. And there I stay. Now, it says in our tradition that on Shabbat, all souls are released from Gehenna. So the first Shabbat comes, and I enter into Gan Eden because they say Shabbat is a taste of the world to come. And it was sublime. It was fantastic. It was blissful. Shabbat ends, and the messenger of the heavenly tribunal says, come on, you have to go back to your resting place in between Gehenna and Gan Eden. And I said, forget it, I like it here. No, you have to go back. I said, no, you know what? I studied Torah with Rabbi Alicia Magal of Lezhensk. It should be on my cheshbon, on my merit record. So you go to the heavenly tribunal and you tell them, I'm going to stay here. So the messenger goes to the heavenly tribunal and comes back and says, it has been determined on high that you shall rightfully take your place in Gan Eden eventually. But because you haven't fully fulfilled your destiny, your promise to Reb Elimelech of Lezhensk, you can't yet take your place in the heavenly Garden of Eden. So Reb Elimelech is at the wedding, telling the guests the story, and he says, so I said to him, come on, let's go. You know, your son's getting married. We'll make a l'chaim. He said, where I'm going is so blissful, so sublime, I can't wait a second any longer. So you go to the wedding and you make a l'chaim on my behalf. And when you do that, tell everybody there to tell everybody they know the story and to make a l'chaim on my behalf. And ask them to tell everyone they know the story and to make a l'chaim on my behalf. So l'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim. And I tell you that story exactly, word for word, as it was first told to me. So that, my friends, is
Wait, there's a question.
Okay. But that's a Jewish view of the afterlife, and a good
because
one.
The story was being told and told and told, did he get into Gan Eden on the merit of that?
On the merit of our remembering, that's how it happens.
Ah, thank you.
Yes. The way you think about the meaning of life determines what you think about afterlife. The beliefs that we hold about what it means to be a human being determines how we understand life after death. In the worldview of materialistic science, to be a human being is to have the firing of the synapses of the brain. When the brain stops firing, is there any life after death? There's none. You're dead. Dead is dead. So in the worldview of materialistic science, dead is dead. There's no afterlife. If you go into traditional Christian theology, there's you go up or you go down, right? Look at that text. None of those outside of the Catholic Church, not Jews, heretics, schismatics, can participate in eternal life in heaven, but will go to the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels unless they are brought into the Catholic Church before the end of life. That's why a lot of Jews opted out of this whole system. So if you go down, you see, this is where I need some commentary. If you go down, it looks like burning fire. If you go up, what do you see? You see cloud, you see heaven. The reason why there's clouds in heaven is because they let you smoke at the bar. Not as good unless with live people. Okay. According to Kabbalah, a human being is a bio-psycho-cosmic continuum. That's the only fancy word I'm going to use here today. A bio-psycho-cosmic continuum. We are body, emotion, mind, spirit, and cosmos. Think of it, wiggle your toes, how you feeling, your mind is, I think this guy knows what to talk about, I'm not so sure. Spirit is where we connect with the source of life, with the oneness, and we're all interwoven into the fabric of the universe. That's what the cosmos is. And these are the levels of the soul according to Kabbalah. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. Somebody had a question last time about soul. And if you're a little bit of a yogi, there's the pranic body and the emotional body, the mental body, the universal self, and oneness. So this is what it means to be human according to Kabbalah. And then when you leave the body in the transition we call death, each of these elements, body, emotion, mind, and spirit, go through a series of different adventures of the journey. So this is the big picture, and then we're going to go through all the details. But just like there's body, emotion, mind, spirit while we're alive, chibuta kever is the pangs of the grave, where we work through our residue attachments to physicality. Gehenna is where we work through our unresolved psycho-emotional complexes. It's the realm of emotional purgation. Gan Eden is heavenly bliss, where we harvest our spiritual accrued karma, if you will. And spirit is where we return back to the source of life.
Could you take a minute, because this is brilliant and wonderful and amazing. We have studied in our Torah study the four worlds, body, emotion, mind, spirit, to use your words, but you've added a fifth, the cosmos.
Well, this is I'm going to go back. Let me see if it'll go back here. It's Nefesh, Ruach, Chaya, Yechida. This is the five levels of the soul. There's four worlds, but there's five levels of the soul.
Exactly.
Chaya and Yechida are both in the realm of the Yud.
What Reb Zalman of blessed memory used to kind of call the God field or the soul soup, where it's more undifferentiated rather than the personality being individual.
Right.
This is great. Hold on to this for a second. This is beautiful, because we talk about the four levels of Torah study, the four levels of understanding, the four levels of the soul in the body in here, and now we're getting beyond that, because it's on a continuum, and that's what you've given to us so far today. So we're following you into that other realm as a continuum. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Right, and I mean, so here's the triptych. Remember when we used to go to AAA and get a triptych? So this is the triptych for what we're going to do here. This is going to keep showing up, and if you go into the link that was sent, maybe you need to put the link not into the chat, but put the link in, or if you got the link, you can download a 3-page document off my website. So this is what we were going to be looking at. The process of the afterlife journey is separation from the physical body, emotional purification or purgation, intellectual contemplation in the Maimonidean sense of sort of like seeing God, and in a Kabbalistic sense, spiritual unification of being God, of merging with the Godhead. And as I'll show you, they correspond with Shiva, Kaddish, Yortzeit, and Yisker. So this is the Yud Hey Vav Hey here. So you have any more? Anyone want to question? Because this is basically the map that I'm going to follow for the rest of this talk here. And I'm going to need a reader with my text. So stay on camera if you can with me.
I'm just looking at the 4 levels that you've put in your chart, and I think this is going to be extremely helpful in explaining the morning practices that we do related to these 4 levels. So thank you. Go on.
The afterlife and the grief journey, pastoral care for bereavement is a small little book of mine and has all that in there. Afterlife and the grief journey. It's Albion Andalus. Okay, so we're going to look at the early phases of the afterlife journey. What happens from the moment of death in the shorter term period. Okay, you want to read this, please?
Kibut ha-kever, pangs of the grave. Rabbi Yehuda said, for 7 days the soul goes to and fro from the house to the grave, from the grave to the house, mourning for the body.
I didn't make that up. I mean, that's in the Zohar. I have to say, first of all, I like that graphic, but I have to say that single quote, I think, is one of the most paradigm shifting quotes. For 7 days, the soul goes to and fro from his grave to his house, from his house to his grave, mourning for the body. And they didn't teach you that in Hebrew school. What it says is there's an intermezzo phase immediately after death when the soul, or in this case, the nefesh aspect of the soul, sticks around in close proximity to the physical world. And it's in that period of time that people often have these sort of synchronistic experiences or felt sense of a presence. It's in that early period where somebody has a dream that somebody is about to die, and then they get a call early in the morning that that person has died. I mean, there are so many of those kinds of stories. And it corresponds with our rituals of Shiva. Shiva is an ancient soul guiding ritual. Here, somebody took that quote. Here's the soul going back and forth from the cemetery to the house. But what do we do in Shiva? We cover the mirrors. Why do we cover the mirrors? Because we wouldn't want the soul to sort of see itself in the mirror. What do you do at the end of the block? What do you do at the end of the Shiva?
You walk around the block.
Why do you walk around the block?
Feel grounded, back in routine, and
start your exercise routine so you can lose the weight you put on during the week of Shiva, eating bagels and lox.
But you're accompanied around the block to signify in some sort of circular way that you're no longer in that first deep round of mourning. And
right, it's at the beginning of a return into into a post-Shiva life.
Yeah.
But it's also, as I learned from Reb Zalman, it's also saying to the soul, we're going to walk you this far, and now you have to go the rest of the way on your own.
Oh, sort of like when you have a visitor and you walk them 4 amot from the door. Right. You never let them go by themselves. So it's like a visitor.
Now, when my father-in-law died, it was Parshat Vayechi, which is Jacob's death. And my wife says, it says in the Torah today that Jacob is gathered to his ancestors. So who are the ancestors to whom my father has been gathered? So we went around the room and we mentioned people, and my father-in-law's first cousin was there, so we mentioned their mutual grandmother, and some of our contemporaries had died. And then when we walked her around the block, escorting her father's soul on its way, it was as if we were helping her take him to reconnect with all those beings on the other side. So that's a very good way for helping people end Shiva. Who are the ancestors to whom your father's been gathered? All right, so that's the earliest phase. Then what happens next is there's a whole series of deathbed visions. So there's ancestral guides, there's mythic guides, there's life review, and I don't know if we'll get to do the dissolution of the elements or not, but let's keep reading some other texts here. Okay? Please, you want to read this?
Rabbi Shimon said, "Have you seen today the image of your father or your mother? For so we have learnt that at the hour of a person's departure from the world, their father or mother and other relatives gather round, and they see them and recognize them, and likewise all with whom they had associated with this world, and they accompany their soul to the place where it is to abide."
So this is comparable to the near-death experience literature. The near-death experience literature talks about how people who were clinically resuscitated and later brought back to life, but when people are clinically resuscitated and brought back to life, they report seeing loved ones and their family or these mythic guides. They have the review, the life review, like you saw in the story. I had a panoramic vision of every single deed I've ever done in my life. Today, there is more resuscitation technology available than any other point in human history. Our medical technology has evolved that in some cases, there's a guy named Sam Parna who has a book called Erasing Death. They can keep people alive for over an hour sometimes. A lot of major city hospitals have an ice room. When somebody codes, they take them to the ice room. They keep them on ice, and they can resuscitate them more easily if they do that without brain damage. But how did these people in the 12th century of Tzfat or of Guadalajara, Spain, know about that? It's one thing today, the nurses report people saying, "I see my father, I see my father." People report these, and it's become commonplace. It's not a surprise. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was working in hospice, one guy says, "Oh, my brother," and he gets out of bed and he runs down the hall in the hospital, and they bring him back, they strap him down, they give him Thorazine, and he dies that night. But today they're much more receptive and more open to that. This was almost 40 years ago. I was present when that happened. But somehow the Kabbalists understood these mysteries of the invisible worlds because they were Illuminati. They were spiritually evolved, and they could sometimes see into these worlds. So the question to each of you is, who do you imagine being there for you when your time comes?
It's interesting you say that because I never met my grandparents. They perished in the Holocaust. But when I went into deep meditation, I met them. And I would love to meet them if it could be like
Right.
at that time. I
My
mean,
mother
I
was
sort of assume my mother and my father of blessed memory would be there, but I want to see the ones before that, my actual ancestors for whom I'm named, my brother's named,
right.
uh, and are they still around after all this time? It brings up so many questions.
Yeah. I remember my mother was 10 years old when her father was killed in a car accident, and she was in her 80s. And I said, "Ma, when you die, you might see your father." And she lit up, like she was this 10-year-old girl who, didn't grew up without a daddy. I said, "Daddy, Daddy's probably not going to be there. He's probably got stuck at Home Depot or something like that." Because my father would never come home for Shabbos on time because he was always at the hardware store or something. He was a dawdler, and he was always, "I'll be there. Daddy, we said 6 o'clock. I'll be there at 7." I said, "Daddy, I can't promise he'll be there. He'll probably be a little bit late." So we had a good laugh. I loved this. I had fun doing these slides. So this is a picture. This is actually a picture of my mother's family. This is my mother, the little baby on the left of the photograph, and they were wealthy enough to go into a studio in 1923, and everybody was so well dressed. And these were these three sisters. Okay, so here's another one. So sometimes the vision is of familial beings like mommy, daddy, bubby, zadie, and sometimes there's of mythic beings. So read this, please.
No person dies before seeing the Shekhinah, and because of its deep yearning for the Shekhinah, the soul departs in order to see her. That's from the Zohar. And with the Shekhinah there come 3 ministering angels to receive the soul of the righteous, also from the Zohar. When one departs the world, this world, they see many strange things on their way, and they meet Adam, the first human, sitting at the gates of Gan Eden, ready to welcome all who have observed the commands of their master.
So, the near-death experience literature is interesting because, the Hindus see Krishna and the Buddhists see the Buddha, and we don't have a very clear iconography. Judaism, because of the prohibition against images, like the Shekhinah, modern Jewish feminism notwithstanding, is not a woman in a tallis and Birkenstocks. Though you could find such images on www.shekhinah.com, my wife's website, right? Right. And we don't have an iconography of Adam. We don't have a visual iconography. There's some of that in Renaissance art, but we don't hold those images. So in a way, we're almost like we have a dearth of a post-mortem iconography. So the Hindus see Krishna, the Christians see Jesus or Mary, the Buddhists see the Buddha, and the Jews see someone from the Federation shows up. So I have a story. I had an uncle, a great uncle, like my mother's uncle, my grandmother's brother, and he was of the vintage. The younger people don't know about this anymore, but he ran away from the Tsar's army after World War One, and he came to America. Actually, came to Canada, and he was rabidly anti-religious. He hated religion with a passion. I mean, his parents were murdered when he's away for World War One, and his brother didn't take him into the house when he came back. So I'm sure that there was good reason for him to have some anger at God. At one point, I wanted to make a Havdalah at his house, and he says, get out, I don't believe. He literally wanted to throw me out of the house because I lit a Havdalah candle. So I was like, relax, I'll put it out. Another time he says to me, I nearly died, and the Rabban Gamliel came and said, Yoina, it's not your time. We called him Uncle Jonas. Yona was his name. And who shows up for him in his near-death experience? I nearly died. It's Rabban Gamliel from his Talmudic youth in yeshiva in Saragera. I mean, I never heard such things in a way, but it seems to be that, at least this is sort of like Simcha's interpretation on this, that people have some kind of transcendent being help them, and they paint it in the cultural iconography that they're familiar with. So the Christians see Jesus or Mary. The young children, when they die, one of the beings that shows up for young children is Yoda. Well, Yoda's an interdimensional traveler. So I don't know how this works, but this is recorded cross-culturally really changes the way we have to think about dying and death. I mean, one of my clients said, oh, I don't know, my father, I'm so afraid he's going to be stuck in the in-between worlds. And she was stuck. She wasn't willing to let him go. And I said, your father probably has guides to help him. So you need to work on the ways in which you're still stuck. And again, I like I said, I'm not selling belief. I'll sell you my book, www.institute.net. But at least know that this kind of stuff appears cross-culturally. Here's another one. You want to read this, please?
When God desires to take back a person's spirit, all the days they have lived in this world pass in review. From the Zohar.
So, I remember sitting in hospice, and this woman woke up, and she had been dreaming. She had been in this agitated state. And I said, "Where were you?" And she was reliving her childhood in her dream state. And so I think what's the implication of this is that we want to get people to be able to tell their stories. If we have a life review at the end of our life, we also, as Reb Zalman teaches in From Aging to Saging, we need to do a life review while we were alive. And we need to help people as they're aging and winding down to tell the story of their life. I used to say to my undergraduate students, when you go home for Thanksgiving, take your iPhone and sit with your grandparents and ask them about their life. My
As a
friend
matter of
David.
fact, Rabbi, one of our congregants wrote in, the guide takes the form of someone we can relate to.
And there are these transcendent beings that help us leave this incarnation. Like people are dying a lot, so there's a whole system for bringing souls into the other side. As I said, between this world and the world beyond is a window and not a wall.
I find it interesting that there might be a being that then chooses to take the form of what someone, according to their own religious beliefs and background, would recognize. I just recently saw a movie where the pastor's son sees Jesus and feels totally comfortable and comes back and says, "I now have faith because death is really easy." It's kind of a very interesting movie. And as I was watching that, I said, "Well, who would you see? And how is it that everyone doesn't have the same look at angels?" So
Right.
I like what you're saying about there's this energy that comes to us and it takes the form of what we can see and understand.
Right. We may project our cultural psyche onto that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. There was a guy by the name of Roger Woolger. Roger Woolger, you may have heard of Brian Weiss. Brian Weiss is
Yes, I
sort of
read
this
his
nice
book.
Jewish guy who accidentally stumbled into past life memories. He was doing hypnotic work, and he was a nice Jewish shrink, and he discovered past life stuff. This guy named Roger Woolger has only one book on past life and a lot of articles, and then he died young. His mother was a spiritualist. He grew up in England, so he knew this stuff very, very intimately. And he and I were both at a conference, and I presented this model based on Kabbalah, and he presented his model of the afterlife experiences based on thousands of hours of guiding people, and it was the exact same model. He said that basically some beings are able to be accompanied into the world beyond by familial members. Maybe they're only um, broadcasting at channel 6 to 12, right? 6 to 13 or 2 to 13 if you remember that metaphor, right? And other beings may be broadcasting at UHF or at cable level stations. So but he reported the same thing that I saw going on. Yeah. So again, I want to say, look, I've been swimming in this stuff for a long time. I think the real question from the Jewish point of view is not so much about afterlife, but how it helps us deal with the reality of dying and death. I think I think conversations with somebody near the end of their life, who do you imagine being there for you? Just to say our tradition says that perhaps loved ones or may be present for you. Who do you imagine being there? And sometimes you have people who don't want to see their father. you know, Sometimes people have trauma, and that's I don't want to I don't want to see that son of a bitch. I mean, I had a client who would, if she found her father, she said she wanted to kill him and chop him up to pieces. It was a heavy
So you're
traumatic.
talking about the moment of death and the early moments for the soul and for the bereaved. What about that year before the unveiling, those 11 months?
Well, let's do that. Now we're going to talk about Kaddish.
Oh, good. Okay.
Right? Okay. So at some point, this phase of the journey ends, and the nefesh is like the bioenergy. It sort of eventually it dissipates, and then the ruach is the emotional energy field. It's the receptacle that holds our unresolved psycho emotional stuff. Okay, so here's a chart, right? So now we're going to go into the realm of Gehenna. Now, Gehenna in rabbinic literature is sort of 12 months of purgation and purification. They do is Gehenna half fire, half ice. But the Kabbalists take it much more metaphorically. But this here is a very, very powerful textual quote. It's from medieval midrash, Ketzad din hakever. You want to read this?
Yeah. Gehenna, purgation. There are 5 kinds of punishments in Gehenna, and Isaiah saw them all. He entered the second compartment, and he saw 2 men hanging by their tongues. And he said, "Oh, you who unveils the hidden, reveal to me the secret of this." He answered, "These are the men who slandered. Therefore they are thus punished." Midah keneged midah. Yeah.
Exactly.
He
The
entered the
punishment
third.
fits the crime. Midah neged
Yeah.
midah.
He entered the third compartment, and he saw there men hanging by their organs. He said, "O you who unveils the hidden, reveal to me the secret of this." And he answered, "These are the men who neglected their own wives and committed adultery with the daughters of Israel."
Okay, listen. If you have a family member in hospice, don't go read this text.
No.
But from a pedagogical point of view, it's fantastic. I'll tell you why. Um, Let me stay with the text, and then I'll go off screen again. Reb Zalman says, teachings on heaven and hell in religious literature are not literal, but they're symbolic of states of consciousness. He says eschatology equals psychology. Teachings on heaven and hell in religious literature are not literal. The fundamentalists would have you believe that they're literal. Okay? When my son was in Bloomington, Indiana, and I was driving from Bloomington to the airport at Indianapolis, there was a sign that said, "Avoid hell, repent." And I always pulled over to check my GPS just to make sure I didn't make a wrong turn. So the fundamentalists would have you believe that heaven and hell are geographic locations. But the Kabbalistic transpersonal understanding is that in the post-mortem journey we and also based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead too, we encounter elements of our psyche that need some processing or need some resolution. What would it be to imagine Gehenna being, like they say in the 12-step program, a fearless moral inventory? So you get to see yourself and you get to see your life unadorned and undefensive. So you might have to look at all the times that you shot from the lip and were verbally abusive to people you loved. And it might feel like hanging from the tongue. You might have to look at your life story and see all of the ways in which you acted with impropriety in your intimate relationships and hurt others. Victim empathy. So it might feel like hanging from. So what we have in this notion of Gehenna is a process of self-encounter where nobody dies without some amount of work that has to be worked out. There's a certain amount of of regrets. You know, how do I like to tell the story? You know, imagine you had a friend Joe, and one day your friend Joe came up and smacked you across the face and kicked you in the shins, and 6 months later I said to you, hey, what happened to Joe? And you say, Joe, did I ever tell you what happened? I'm still so pissed off at him. What's the point? Emotions persist long after the initial point of contact. And while we're alive, we're very good at shoveling the SH under the rug. So we can have a fight with somebody, and we can get up in the morning and grab a cup of coffee, and later in the day it shows up as our low back hurts because we feel unsupported, or our neck hurts because there's a pain in the neck, or Louise Hay, who does psychosomatic healing, says you get a bladder infection because you're pissed off, right? So we know from psychosomatic medicine that we carry all of these emotions in our body. And I mean, anybody who does deep level tissue work knows that very, very well. Or if you've ever had that done, you know, it's like somebody is massaging your chest, and you have a memory of, and it comes with tears. So it may be that in death, some of those unprocessed emotions, psycho-emotional residue of life experience, is what we have to process through in order to go to keep going on the journey. So that's sort of what Gehenna is, and then it corresponds with the Kaddish, right? How long do we say Kaddish?
11 months, and then every year.
And how long is the maximum length of time in Gehenna? It's 12 months. So why is it only 11 months to say Kaddish? Because you wouldn't think that your parent gets the maximum length of time in Gehenna, though from my clients, they say my parent should have gotten 12 to 36 months in Gehenna, right? So here's this really anomalous thing. It says that our saying Kaddish helps redeem souls from Gehenna, which I think that's problematic. Not everybody has somebody to say Kaddish for them. Not everybody believes in life after death. You know, like what does that mean? So then, this is let's see. This is Simcha's Kaddish Gehenna rap. This is how I understand the act of saying Kaddish helps redeem souls from Gehenna. And not everybody says Kaddish, but I think of it as Kaddish college. Like you're in an 11, 12-month process, whether you're saying Kaddish or not. So a guy shows up at Shul the first day. You son of a bitch. You didn't leave a life insurance policy. You liked your work more than your kids. And now I have to say these stupid words that don't say anything about death. And the response from the soul on the other side says, and you? See, it's a little come through from the other side a little more. You're a pain that took us to raise. You were always so busy with your friends. You never had time. You didn't make life easy for anybody around you. You were a piece of work. It's 2 months. It's 3 months. You know what, Dad? I didn't know who you were. I had no idea who you were. And the response comes back as the soul comes through from the other side and says, you're right, I didn't know who I was. They taught me just to go work to make a living. I didn't know who I was. I've had a few months here since I've been here, and I'm getting to know myself a little better. But you're right, I didn't know who I was. You know, you kadal because 5 months, 6 months, you kadal. You know what, Daddy? I never heard you say I love you. I never heard you say I love you. And the response comes back and says, listen, I never heard it either. And I do love you. And I'm sorry. I have regret that I didn't tell you that. But yeah, I love you. 8 months, 9 months, you know what, today, I just miss you. I just miss you. Today it just came in really, really strongly. I miss you. And the response comes back and says, look, I missed you too. I made a lot of mistakes. And I hope you can forgive me. Because I see that I hurt you. I made mistakes. And it's the last day of saying Kaddish. And I don't think it's on a timeline, but it's a process. Yit Kadal, Yit Kadash. You know what, Dad? I've been angry at you. I've been missing you. But today I just feel I love you and I forgive you. I love you and I forgive you. And the response comes back and says, and I bless you. Take what I gave you and make the best of it and let go of the rest. And the year of St. Kaddish is over. And is that redeeming souls from Gehenna? I don't know, but it sure as hell makes a lot of sense that there's some kind of interactive process between the bereaved and the psyche or the soul of the deceased. Yeah, please.
So when we're doing the unveiling, I often ask the family, because it's a much more intimate group than it was at the burial, usually
Right.
just a few. Did you have any signs during the year?
Right.
And their eyes usually get big, and then they start telling me about the feathers or the dimes or the ringing tones or some sign that they had during that year. And I said, we didn't learn this in rabbinical school, but in my experience, there is some connection, some communication. So I've been really wanting to hear what you think about that and how to process it, and I guess just to accept that it's real.
Well, you know what? I'm doing a sort of bereavement support counseling with a rabbi. And he had an instance where I don't know if it was an unveiling or I think it was a yahrzeit, and he said to a guy who lost his son, he said, he can still be around. Do you ever feel his presence? And the guy got and the father of the deceased son got really mad at him. He said, "Rabbi, dead is dead. Joe is dead," or whatever. So I said, you have to reframe the question in a much softer way. Like our tradition says, sometimes there's some connection. You ever feel a sense of connection? So it's not were there signs. I would even soften that. Not were there signs, but I'm wondering in the course of the year, were there moments of feeling some connection? See, because there must be something wrong with me. I didn't get any signs. So you want to really. I mean, look, you're in Sedona, so I mean, you asked them if they had signs of extraterrestrials, and they're not gonna freak, right? But you want to soft. You want to be very soft about it. What I say, and I'll end with this slide. I'm rushing ahead, but between this world and the world beyond, it's a window and not a wall, and there are moments when the window opens. So have there ever been moments of feeling there was some window of connection for you and your loved one? Yeah, and the other thing that comes up, I wrote about it in my newer book about dreams. People have dreams, and there's a whole tradition of the deceased appearing in dreams. There's a whole tradition of that, so that's also. Were there signs? Were there dreams? Were there moments? My father was always tinkering with electronics. I mean, he was born in 1916, and he tells the story of how, they had one of those telephones where you would sort of, right? And they had to call a phone company in because my father, as like a 10-year-old or 11-year-old boy, took it apart. And my grandmother says, "Oh, I don't know how it broke." And the way my father tells the story is he goes up to the repair guy and says, "I broke it. I took it apart." But I always thought, so throughout his life he was always doing different kinds of shtick with electronics, and if he was going to come back with some kind of electronic device, and in the middle of the shiva, an FM bell that he had never installed started beeping loudly in the middle of the shiva. Or sometimes in the first year I would be talking with my mother on the phone and we'd get a crackling sound on the phone, and it was, there was a sense of like, okay, daddy was around here these days. Yeah, so to speak to each of you here, I think this process of Kaddish and Gehenna suggests that the emotional relationship with somebody who has died continues, and there still can be transformation after death. I mean, that's what therapy is for, in a way. Um, I had a client whose father was a raging drunk, and she was doing some intensive work with me. And at one point during that process, she had a dream where he appeared to her and he apologized. And it was very, very transformative for her. So I think, again, I'm not teaching afterlife because there's a sense of it's the best thing since sliced bread. I teach it because I think it helps us process grief. Mary, you had a you.
Yes, I have a question about going to the grave site. Somewhere along the way, I've learned we're not supposed to go until that unveiling because it's disruptive to the peace of the spirit or the
I
soul.
don't know where that comes from because in Israel they put up a stone within 30 days. You're right. And yeah, I don't I mean there's a whole tradition of of going to gravesite and asking for intercessory prayers. I think part of that is sort of the American Protestant influence. You have a little less of it where you are than on the East Coast. Influence of this sort of like New England provincialism. Like we keep more distance from the dead. But Sephardic culture, again, there's all these traditions of Moroccan saints and all these prayer practices that are done at the gravesides and that. So yeah, yes, that's true that people say that. That's all I'll say. Okay. Anybody want to ask a question now? I wouldn't leave you in Gehenna. We still have enough time, but I want to make sure I don't leave you in Gehenna before we go on. Okay, so we're back to our map. Now, um, we have about 15-20 minutes, and I've used most of my time talking about Gehenna and Chibut HaKever, which is totally consistent with rabbinic tradition. There's a book called Legends of the Jews, and there's an index in that book, and it has 3 times the amount of entries for Gehenna than it does for Gan Eden, because the rabbis used Gehenna. I said this last time that the rabbis were ethicists and they used Gehenna as a carrot and stick to encourage people to live moral lives. So Gan Eden here. You want to read this one? This is a little more angelic.
Okay,
Little more
Gan Eden.
angelic. Go ahead.
Gan Eden, heavenly paradise. Gan Eden has 2 gates of carbuncle, and 60 myriads of ministering angels keep watch. Each of these angels shine like the radiance of the heavens. When the righteous person approaches, angels remove from them clothes in which they had been buried, and clothe them with 8 robes of the clouds of glory, and place upon their head 2 crowns, one of precious stones and pearls, and the other of gold. And they place 8 myrtles in their hand and praise them. And they lead them to a place full of waters, surrounded by 800 species of roses and myrtles.
So this is also medieval midrash Masechet Gan Eden. There's a whole series of texts about Gan Eden and Gehenna and Chibut HaKever in medieval midrash. I have a harder time extracting psychological application from the Gan Eden text, but this is the important line. At a certain point, angels remove from them the clothes in which they had been buried. In other words, at a certain point, we let go of our terrestrial individuality and identity, and we align with our transpersonal or spiritual nature. So it may be that Gan Eden, by the time we get to Gan Eden, at a certain point, we work through our embodied karma. We leave go of attachment to the body. We leave go of attachments to our emotional drama, and then we attune to our higher spirit nature. And it's said that there are 7 realms of Gan Eden, and where we are assigned, so to speak, is a reflection of what we have accrued in our own lifetime. Like, how much money do you have in your Gan Eden account? Are you only going to be able to afford a Motel 6 or a Best Western? Or if you studied a little bit of Hasidism, you get a Best Western, or you get a Hilton, or you get something on the French Riviera. So and also it says that we connect with soul family groupings. So, like when my mother went to see a psychic after my father died, my father was with his family and they were singing and dancing. And his family were they were theatrical and they sang and they were musicians. And my other grandmother thought they were like frivolous. She was like much more serious. They were like card players and drinkers and smokers and parties. They partied a lot. So he was partying with his relatives and that.
I have a question about the graphic. When we say Pitchuli Shaarei Tzedek Avovam Odeya, I mean, we often talk about these gates of righteousness, gates of heaven. What is this idea about a gateway through which we pass and then we are transformed?
Well, a lot of the metaphors of the afterlife stuff is based upon almost like the technology of the culture. So today we would talk about wormholes, right? Or let me go back to the Gehenna text for a second to bring in this point. The old metaphors of Gehenna was the penal colony, and medieval torture is often replicated. The text about medieval torture picks up the penal colony, and I know exactly what that's like because I raised two kids in the same household, and I saw one inflicting that kind of torture upon the other one as they were growing up. But the new metaphor is rehab. So the old metaphor for Gehenna is torture and penal colony. The new metaphor is rehab, which people go to rehab and it can feel like hell, right? So the gate metaphor is evolving to higher levels of knowing and being. So there were a lot of gates. There are gates and palaces and castles, but I don't think that again that those we use human. We use embodied metaphors to speak of transcendent kinds of moments. So that corresponds with the Yortzeit. The belief is, this is Isaac Luria, that reciting Kaddish at the time of an anniversary of a death elevates the soul every year to a higher sphere in the heavenly Garden of Eden. So here, the belief, like the belief with Gehenna, is we help redeem the souls. We help redeem the souls from Gehenna. Here, our Kaddish helps the soul elevate higher and higher in the spheres of Garden of Eden. At a certain point between Yizkor and Yortzeit, the souls become available to us as intercessors. So there's a whole tradition we have for prayers at the graves of Rebbes, asking them to intervene in our lives. So this is actually, I saw her this afternoon. This is my friend Goldie Milgram and she's praying at the kever of Rav Nachman. And this is their prayers at Isaac Luria's grave and at Kever Rachel. So we have a whole tradition. Okay, so here, right, so Gan Eden is I'm associated with the Yortzeit because it's also traditional among the Hasidim to say the neshama zol haben and aliyah. May the soul ascend higher and higher. You make a l'chaim. Tzror HaChaim. The story with Tzror HaChaim is that the rabbis didn't have to standardize belief. They had to standardize practice. So in some cases, Gan Eden is the end of the journey. In some cases, particularly in Talmudic texts influenced by Greco-Roman tradition, there's a place called Tzror HaChaim, which I call the source of life. So the soul returns back to the source of life. It's mission control for souls. And then that brings in the whole notion of Gilgul. And we say prayers at Yisker, inviting a connection with the ancestors. It's in a sense, it's asking the ancestors to intercede in our lives. So whereas in the early phases, we're helping the soul move on, in the later phases, according to the people doing ancestral healing work, redeemed souls are able to be beneficent intercessors in our own lives. So ultimately, let's see how we're doing for time. Between this world and the world beyond is a window and not a wall. Between this world and the world beyond is a window and not a wall. Here's there's birth, youth, maturity, and old age and death, though we know that some people don't live long enough and die, and some people bypass maturity on their way to old age. And then, so no, here's it. This is what is life? One half of the first half of life between birth and death is one half of the cycle of existence. Birth through to death is one half of the cycle of existence. The other half of the cycle of existence is death through to rebirth. So there's youth, maturity, and old age. And then from death, there's the deathbed visions that we just saw earlier, there, which is the separation from the body, chibut hakever. There's the emotional purgation. There's the heavenly bliss, Gan Eden. And then there's returning to the source, preparing for incarnation. There's in-womb texts. So this is sort of like 15 years of teaching Jewish views of the afterlife on one screen. So that, my friends, is a Jewish view of the afterlife. Oh, wait. We have to go to commercial first. Jewish views of the afterlife. And here's my newest. Spirits, Ghosts, and Dibbuks, Afterlife Journeys in Yiddish Lore. And May the Angels Carry You, Jewish Prayers and Meditations for the Deathbed. Okay, question. So we got time for a few questions. Okay, Chana.
Okay, I have just asked her to unmute. Hannah Esther, there you go.
What's the purpose of each life?
So I believe, in reincarnation that, each lifetime has a purpose. But what do you think in terms of each life's purpose? Is it a matter that our soul has a grand purpose and we come back to continue that on and keep learning and growing?
So,
or is it different each time?
One of the reasons for incarnation is the soul is required to incarnate either because of sins or because it has not completely fulfilled obligations in Torah and mitzvot while we're alive. So again, in the Jewish model, we reincarnate if we haven't fully fulfilled all the mitzvot, but there's this whole thing about there's 248 limbs and 365 spiritual veins, and you have to activate all of them, as if to say you have to grow the aura completely. It's another way of saying becoming enlightened. So one of the reasons we reincarnate is to fulfill the mitzvot. Another reason we fulfill the mitzvot is some people come back as a universal soul in the Shema Klaliyit in order to help other souls. So, I find the reincarnation material a little less psychologically apt, but I think our purpose is to in simple humanistic language, we're here in each incarnation to make the world a better place, to love people, to touch people's hearts, and to continue the evolutionary project of humanity.
Would that be related to the Lamed Vavniks?
Well, some people have a you know, they get a super pass to be able to work on that.
So
So the
thank you,
love
Hannah
of love
Esther,
is
for that. I'd like to end with a blessing that incorporates the insight and inspiration that you've just given us. Let's see. May the Holy One who blessed our ancestors and who inspires us to learn about the journey of the soul also bless us, that we may merit in this world to have enough yichus in the next world to enjoy that journey even more than we're enjoying this life. May we have opportunities to do mitzvot, and may we be comforted in the belief that we will be guided afterwards, and that we ourselves may become guides in the future. May our hearts be comforted by all of our study of Torah, of Avodah, and of doing Gemilut Chasadim, acts of loving kindness. May all of the study that we've done today and all the times help inspire us in the way we live our lives.
Amen.
Amen, amen, amen.
Thank
So,
you.
I want to thank you for this opportunity to be here. As I add a few more years to my life, I mean, I was, let's see, 1974, so it was 51 years ago tomorrow that my closest friend was killed in a car accident. I got called into this work, and I sort of see the pathways of the journey I've traveled as really leaving um, some kind of wisdom guidelines for people to understand this lost Jewish tradition about life after death. And so I love teaching, and I also do counseling with people, both people in grief and people sort of dealing with unresolved issues with loved ones who've died. So
May you have the strength for many more years to do this holy work.
Amen, 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 amen. Thank you so much. Thanks for this opportunity.
Shalom, everybody.
Okay. Erev Tov. Bye bye.